Congress has some pretty substantial economic powers. Presidents, when they run for office, often talk about all the economic stuff they're going to do. They're going to lower taxes, but it's really the job of Congress to pass laws that deal with those kind of issues. So the president's kind of at the mercy of Congress. So one of the major roles that Congress has is the ability really to approve the budget every year, or to propose the budget that eventually the president has to sign into law, and then to also implement taxes. Taxes are either raised or lowered through laws that are passed by Congress. We're going to focus a little bit more on like the budget powers of Congress. A budget is really a plan on how money should be spent. Like think about your family's budget. Congress is responsible for developing this plan every year that is responsible for how the government is going to spend money. Also, it's important to note that every single tax bill by tradition begins in the House of Representatives. If there's going to be a law that is passed to either raise or lower taxes, that bill has to be first presented in the House of Representatives. There's a special committee called the Ways and Means Committee that deals with tax stuff. And the reason why it begins in the House first is, if you remember, the House was always directly elected by the people. The Senate was originally appointed. So they thought that at the beginning, if you had the Senate doing the tax stuff, that potentially the citizens could start saying, like, no taxation without representation again. So clearly today, we directly elect both, but by tradition, all tax bills still begin in the House. So we're going to focus on the budget a little bit. So there are two different types of spending that Congress sort of messes around with. The first type of spending is called entitlement spending. This is the part of the budget every year that cannot be removed. It's like these are all things that we have to spend every single year because there's a law that requires us to spend, like Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or veterans benefits. These are things that there are laws in place that require this money to be spent. These are called entitlements because people are entitled to this money. There's not a ton of debate over this on a yearly basis with members of Congress. The fighting in Congress comes in what we refer to as discretionary spending. This is money that can be adjusted on a year-to-year basis based on like what priorities members of Congress have. Like I want to spend more on education this year and less on defense. And if you look, out of the money that can be adjusted each year, the discretionary spending, we're spending 52% of all that money on defense and then 48% on all the other stuff. So obviously the biggest chunk of our discretionary budget where we can decide where to spend money is given to the military. And if you look overall in how the money was spent during this is the 2019 sort of year, you can see that this is discretionary spending here that relates to the military. This is all of the other stuff that we have choice over, and all of the other parts of the pie graph here essentially are entitlement spending, meaning like we can't adjust them without changing the law. These are a matter of priority. These have to be spent because there are laws that require that money to be spent. If you look, this is a graph that sort of looks at the budget for the government. This is the zero mark right here. This would be we are taking in exactly as much as we are spending. Anytime that we as a government have money left over at the end of the year, that's called a surplus. A deficit is when we're spending more than we actually have. If you look, if this is a zero line, you can see that we've only had one surplus. That was at the very end of Bill Clinton's presidency in the 1990s. For most of recent history, we are actually putting the country into more debt each year because we essentially are spending more as a nation than we are taking in, and that's called a deficit.